usual, you've got the chat. Feel free to use it. Ask me anything. If I've missed any of your questions, don't be shy. Ask again. And if you don't know about it, you've got a postcard button somewhere in the middle. So that's to take a screenshot of what you see on the screen. And after the tour, you can download them or share them with your friends or family. And thank you, Sam, for demonstrating at the perfect timing. You also have... or Samantha, because it is Sunday today. I should say Samantha then. So you've got a tip button. Most of you know the drill already. But on Hego, all the tours are free to join. So the only money we get really as a guide, it is straight from your generosity. Is it Monday already in New Zealand? Yeah, that's right. So yeah, thank you very much in advance if you're in a position to tip. And you also have a follow button. It should be somewhere above the chat. So if you don't follow me yet, if you are a London lover or if you are into your dark history, you might want to hit that little follow button. And for the ones that don't know me, I'm Nathalie. I'm sure you can already tell from my accent, but just in case, if you've not quite placed my accent yet, I'm French. Right, let's go. So we are heading into Leek Street. My fellow friend is back, but he's going away. So Leek Street, it's a lovely tunnel that is now like an open air gallery, really. What happened is the tunnel used to belong to the Eurostar. For the ones that don't know, Eurostar, it is the train that goes super fast to Paris. It used to be 3 hours, but now I believe it's 2 hours and 16 minutes. They now live from King's Cross, St. Pancras in King's Cross area, but they used to go from Waterloo, which is quite ironic, really, because Waterloo is named after the battle when they beated the French, when they beated Napoleon. And it's also the place where you used to be able to catch a train to go straight into France. So that's quite funny, really. But the Eurostar has moved, and then the tunnel was not really used. Well, it was used as a taxi rack sometimes to grab a taxi. And it was also used as a toilet for a lot of drunken men, so it didn't smell very good. And in 2008, Banksy, the infamous Banksy, created a festival called the Cannes Festival. Cans as a spray can. Let me show you the poster. So through the Cannes Festival, a lot of artists were invited, and this artist, the duck, is done one in my car park, and so yeah, a lot of artists came here for the Cannes Festival, and some were very famous, and some could have been doing it for the first time. Banksy had a special area where people could try stencils for the very first time. And let me try to show you the ceilings from here. Ta-da. So this is open for anyone to cover. Anyone can come and do their art here. Officially, you can do anything as long as it's not, of course, racist or sexist or anything. Then the tunnel would paint over it. And anyone can come and repaint, as long as there is a rule. You're kind of meant to repaint a piece fully. If you, it's not really cool if you come and cover somebody halfway. You can come and cover them up, but between them, they prefer if they repaint them fully. And most of what we've just seen now, it's been painted today. I was here earlier this afternoon, where dozens of artists, graffiti writers were doing their pieces. And Sometimes there's a few. Oh, I cannot. Yeah, I cannot go too far. I have to remember that a bit further down, I'm losing signal. So we're gonna stop here and then go back the other way. Oops, I think I've already gone a little bit too far. Let me go back where the signal is good. I forgot that I had to stop in the middle. And so yeah, Banksy himself did a very famous piece here. Let me show you the image. So through the Cannes Festival, you might know that famous piece here. There were a few. There were also a police officer snorting a line that was here, but I believe that was a stencil that was made in a few different places as well. So it's a very cool place, and it is completely legal. So you can just come here and paint, or even try if you've never tried. You've never held a spray can. You are welcome to come here and try. And if you repaint over somebody, you're not going to offend those artists. The street art is meant to be ephemeral. It's not meant to last. If they wanted it to last, they'll paint on a canvas or something else. On a wall, on average, on a wall, a piece is lasting about 3 months. But in the tunnel, it could be very quick. In the tunnel, people come quite a lot. So it doesn't really matter if it doesn't stay very long, because the thing is, you have a lot of tourists coming here every single day, taking a lot of photos, and then the art ends up being all over Instagram. What the artists want, they want to be seen. So they're better off painting here, where maybe 10,000 tourists a day might walk past, rather than painting a wall in the middle of Surrey in a village, because there the piece might stay for months or maybe years, but then it would be seen by 200 people a day. So they're better off doing it in a place that's very famous, like this one here, because many people would take a photo and they'll post it all over Instagram, and it will become well. Their goal is often to be noticed and then to start doing commission. But of course, graffiti is illegal. I know it's not obvious because we see a lot of it in London, but we are in one of the countries in Europe with the hardest penalties in terms of street art. When I was here earlier this afternoon, a lot of them were wearing a face covering, because if we recognize their tag, it might not be illegal here. But for example, the guy with the duck is done one in my car park. So technically, this afternoon, I could have gone to him and be like, or even call the police on him. I would never do that. And my car park is full of graffitis anyway. But yeah, technically, it's a bit risky to keep the same tag. So the tag is a signature, because they could be caught because of their tag. And it could go until the prison. You could, in the UK, you could go to prison for changing the color of a wall. So the wall, if that's the charge that decide to persecute them, it could, it has happened. Anyway, let's move on, and let me tell you about a very original train station. What happened in London? Well, you know what? Actually, before I tell you about the train station, we talked about the pub earlier for the guys that were a bit early. In my last tour a few hours ago, we talked about the serial killers ago as well. And I told you that he was a bit too friendly with some police officers, and he gave them a bit too much information in a pub. Well, this is the pub, the Crown and Caution. So our serial killer was in there about 130 years ago now. And yeah, so some of you might already know, we've already spoken about that in many of my tours, but basically in the early 1800s, London struggled to bury its dead. Because of the Industrial Revolution, the population of London had doubled from the 1800 to 1840. It had doubled, and then it doubled again from 1840 to 1880. And the, um, the little graveyards around the churches were completely saturated, absolutely disgusting. Some of the bodies had to be exhumed a few weeks after burial or a few months, and then the body parts would be gotten rid of, and the water sources were contaminated. They had to find a solution. The solution came with the creation of the Magnificent Seven, those amazing garden cemeteries on the outskirts of London. Some of them I cover in my tours, but some believed it was not enough. And in 1949, they created the London Necropolis Company. And to Richard Brune and Richard Spry, had an idea. They purchased a bit of land, well, a massive piece of land next to Woking in Surrey, to create the largest cemetery in the world. That is Brookwood Cemetery. And to get the bodies there, they needed a train station with a train for the dead. And the station moved. Let me show you the first one. So that's the first station in the photo. So that's the Necropolis Railway. And the second one was right across the street there. Unfortunately, they've removed the sign. If you see the white line over the arch, it used to read the Necropolis Railway. So that was a train station exclusively for the dead. They'll take people all the way to Brookwood. So Brookwood Cemetery, it's still open today. It is about 30 miles from Waterloo. It was a massive project. When they purchased the land, the two Richards, they wanted to be able to bury 28 million people. Imagine that, 28 millions. That never happened. There were never that many, of course, but that was crazy. At the time, it was the largest in the world. Now it's no longer the case. I think the largest one is actually Najaf, I think it's called, in Iraq, which is 5 million, which is already quite a lot. And so Brookwood was very large, and they used to do a single person per grave. So there's many graves, but there's actually not that many people. At the moment, there's about 250,000 graves. I'm not too sure how many people that translates in, because some graves have been reused. So people would have to agree to go and be buried there. Not everyone wanted to be buried that far away from London. It's a lovely place. I'd love to take you there. Well, some of you might have been with me once. I've done a little snippet in Brookwood, but unfortunately the signal is very bad. There's only maybe 5% of it that I can cover. Some very famous people are buried there, like the Duchess of Argyll. You might know her from the BBC show that came out last year. Dodi Al-Fayed as well. Well, he was buried there, and then eventually they exhumed him and they moved him to his father's property. So for the ones that don't know, Dodi Al-Fayed, it's the guy that used to date Lady Diana when she passed. Is quite featured in the last season of The Crown, if you've not seen that yet. And there's another guy that you probably would have known of. You probably don't know his name. His name is what's his name? Forgot his name. Cosmo Gordon. He was He was, well, not a very nice man. Do you remember watching the Titanic? There's a guy that survives because he steals a baby. Because, you know, when they have those live boats, it's babies, I mean, kids on ladies first. And he takes a baby to get on a lifeboat. Well, that was inspired. That's really how Cosmo Gordon survived. He was an aristocrat that famously survived the Titanic. So he's buried there as well. And it's a massive land. You can, if you are a serial killer in Surrey, if you wanted to bury a body discreetly, I highly recommend Brookwood because it's so big, no one would notice. And a part of it is like a forest because they even do natural burial. You can, well, it's illegal in this country to be buried with no coffin, but you can be buried with a soft coffin, and there's no grave, nothing. It's so yeah, it's quite a cool place. And so the trains would leave from here. The Necropolis Railway, let me show you their logo because it's quite creepy. Where is it? There we go. So the Necropolis Railway was opened in 1954. So it had been only 20 years really that we had the trains. So it was still fairly new. And you had two sections in the train. The first section was for the dead, and the second section for the living. And they would separate religions because the Bishop of London did not want the Church of England to be buried with the dissenters and the other religions. So there were two different. Well, when you got to Brookwood anyway, there were two different stations. The first station was for the dissenters and the Muslim community and every other religion, and the second section was for the Church of England. And the local people, they were not really happy when they decided to open the cemetery. But with the second station, there was a pub. So when they heard that there were going to be a pub, they were like, okay, that's fine then. We'll deal with some dead if we have a pub. And so the trains would leave about 10:30 in the morning, and they'll come back about 3:30 in the afternoon. So that was once a day for the funeral. And they did funerals on a Sunday, which was quite rare. So a lot of the actors would go and be buried there because at the time the theaters were closed on a Sunday. So there's quite a lot of actors there. And in the trains, what do you think would have been the most important for those Victorians in the trains themselves? What do you think they would have to had? Any guesses? Drinks? Actually, there was catering, but that's when they got to the pub there. Toilets? Well, I don't actually know if there was toilets. No. Something that was really important for those Victorians, not so much for us today. We still have it on trains today, actually. Well, I'll tell you, a class system. So even for the dead, they had different classes. You could be first class, second class, or third class. And that would go with the burial as well. So first class, you'd have a decorated room with velvet and everything. And with a first class, once you got to Brookwood, you'd be able to choose the location of the burial, and you'd have to place a monument. It would cost you about 250 quid in today's money, plus the money for the monument. And nothing has changed here. Second class, you'd pay a little bit less. You'd pay about 100 quid. And then once you got there, you'd have less flexibility on the location of the burial. And then if you choose not to have a monument, then the cemetery company allowed themselves to reuse your grave. And third class was about 10 shillings, and then you didn't choose any location, and you didn't have any right to put any monument. Reuse, yeah. So they'll bury somebody else 75 years later. Usually when you buy a plot, it's for 75 years. And there was, even in the waiting room at the station, you had different class, but they'll have just like a curtain. So if they had a day with more first class and less third class, they'll move the curtain, they'll move a few paintings, and there you were. And at the station, apparently, the ceilings were, part of it was glass, because they did not want to be casting any shadows from the sides, because apparently the Victorians, or some of them as well, they had some kind of a weird fear of shadows. They believe some of the shadows could be devils. So they had the sunlight coming from the top, so the shadows were not cast, well, at least not too big. And so that worked, but not as well as the two Richard had expected. It's still an open cemetery today, but they've sold part of it now. They've sold part of the land, so it is still massive, but not as big as it used to be, really. And through World War II, the area of Waterloo has been bombed quite a lot, because, if you want to destroy a city, you might want to destroy their train stations, and Waterloo is one of the big four. So the Necropolis railway station was actually bombed and completely destroyed apart from the facade, and they've decided not to reopen it because, of course, after the war in the 50s, we had cars anyway, so you can easily transport a body in a car. And it was never the massive success that they had expected. It worked, but not like, a lot of people were still not very comfortable with the idea of being buried so far away from their loved ones. So it wasn't that much of a success, and the Necropolis Railway never reopened. Right. We are now in front of the Old Vic Theatre, and time to move on to our first murder mystery of the night. At the time, the theatre used to be called let me cross over, actually, the Royal Victoria Theatre, but they used to name it, or nickname it, I'm going to try to cross, the Blood Tap. The Blood Tap, because apparently some of the plays being played at the theatre were a bit bloody. And there's one lady that might have visited the theatre quite often. She was a sex worker. Her name is Eliza Grimwood. So Eliza, she's going to be our victim. Let me tell you a bit more about her life and how she ended up being up here in Waterloo. She's actually from Sussex. Oh no, she's from Suffolk. What am I saying? She's a farm girl, and she had lost her father quite young, and eventually, at the age of 15, her mum told her she had to go and work in service to bring some income into the family. Her brother had married already, so they had a wife and kids to feed, so they couldn't bring much money to the mum. So she told Eliza she had to go and find a job in service. There was a wealthy family that hired her as a lady of company for one of their daughters that had, she was very poorly. She had a terrible health. So Eliza was hired as a maid, but a maid that would keep company to the little girl. And it's when she worked in service, so she was 15, she started to have an affair with the big brother of the family, the brother of that little girl that was poorly. And she fell pregnant. Now, at the time, if you were pregnant out of wedlocks, it was a massive shame for the family. So that teenage boy took her to London to have an illegal abortion. He gave her some money to pay for it, and he dropped her here. He did not stay with her. He said, "Sorry, love, bye." And she never actually came back to Suffolk. She Well, we don't really know what happened there. Maybe she didn't come back because of the shame, or she might have met somebody. We think she might have met a young actor, and she ended up in the sex trade. Now we've spoken a lot about Victorian prostitutions in a few of my tours. They were, well, even with prostitutes, they were different class. The Victorian class system was everywhere. And Eliza was very much of an upper class sex worker. She had some very wealthy customers. She was a very, very pretty girl. And she, not some of the Victorian sex workers were actually making decent money. Some of them were working in their 20s to save money to then retire at the age of 30 and buy a pub or buy a coffee house and then have I was going to say normal, there's no such thing as normal, but yeah, a normal life. And Eliza was definitely one of them. She was actually fairly happy with what she had accomplished. She had some very wealthy customers. She was very well dressed. They nicknamed her the Countess. So she was, of course, a bit less exposed to STD and stuff like that because she was very selective with our clients. And she actually fell in love with her childhood love story, her first cousin, William Hobart. William was a bricklayer. He was not rich. They had been best friends or lovers when they were kids in Suffolk. And he found her in London and they started a relationship. Now, of course, William was not exactly really happy for her to be a prostitute. He tried to stop her, but she refused. She was happy with the condition. She was happy with the money she was making. She wanted to save money for the future. And they agreed that she was going to continue, but he would take a cut. I know it's a bit dodgy, but he literally took a cut out of her earning. And they stayed together. They lived in a house, 12 Wellington Terrace, which is a bit further. That's where we're heading to. And by the way, little pause in our story. Some of you were with me earlier when we talked about the Lambeth poisoner. The first victim, Ellen Dunworth, when she collapsed on the street after being poisoned, it's exactly here in front of the Wellington pub. Anyway, back to Eliza. She one night on a Friday, she went to the theatre, the Strand Theatre, on the other side of the Waterloo Bridge, straight down. The Strand Theatre doesn't stand today. It's been destroyed. It is approximately, for the ones that don't know London, you might know the Strand station. It's a ghost station. It doesn't exist anymore either. We used to have a tube station called the Strand. Well, that's exactly where the theatre stood. It's basically on the other side of the bridge. There were a lot of sex workers in the theatres. As long as they were well behaved, the theatres didn't mind. And they would often meet their customers there, and then they will take them home or hotels or wherever. And that night, Eliza was in the theatre with one of her friends, another lady of the night. And apparently she told her that she had this new client, a wealthy foreigner, and she said, she said, "Oh, it's him at the back. I'm gonna go and see him." There were a few eyewitnesses that had spotted the foreigner. He was either French or Italian, or some claim that he spoke both French and Italian, and looking quite wealthy, or at least like a high-profile servant, like a servant in a rich family. And the two of them left the theatre. They jumped in a cab, you know, those Acne cabs with the horse carriage. And they got off the cab, just straight down. That's where we're heading in a moment, 12 Wellington Terrace. Eliza paid the fare. She petted the horse and she told the driver, "You've got a lovely horse." And she went inside. So she lived in a property with her boyfriend, William Hobart. They were on the ground floor with their little dog. On the first floor, you had a servant, Mary Fisher. And on the top floor, so it was like three level house, you had another sex worker, another Mary, and she was also living with her boyfriend William Best. And Mary Fisher, she actually she saw the gentleman. She saw the customer coming in with Eliza. Eliza was very relaxed, and the gentleman, she didn't really see his face because he looked down and he brought his hat down and he went straight into the bedroom. And the other sex worker, Mary Clover, she was already up there with her boyfriend, so she didn't see the gentleman. And by the way, this is St. John's Church. This is where Eliza is buried. She's buried at the back in the graveyard. And across the street there used to be a hotel called York Hotel. That's where they had the inquest. So she went to bed or whatever she had to do with the foreigner. The night was quiet. The dog did not bark or anything. Nothing strange, nothing out of the ordinary. And in the morning, about 6 a.m., William Hobart, so the boyfriend, wanted to speak to Eliza. So he went to the door and he was like, Eliza. He didn't want to open the door straight away because he knew the parlor where she slept was like her bedroom where she took our customers. So he didn't know whether the customer was still there. Eliza did not reply, so he opened the door. He spotted Eliza on the floor. She was actually in a pool of blood. She had been brutally attacked. Her throat had been slashed, a very deep gash. And she had a gash in the back as well. So there were a bit of mutilation after the murder. And Bart was crying. He was like shouting, Eliza. He ran upstairs straight away to wake up Mary Clover, the other prostitute. And he said, Mary, come down, Eliza has been murdered. She's been murdered. And in the bedroom, there were blood everywhere. They found a pair of gloves, purple velvet gloves that had nothing to do there. And her chamber pot, Eliza's chamber pot, was found under the kitchen sink when really it should have been in her room. Now, of course, the police came. The police was fairly new. We are in 1837. So she... I love the blood and gore. I don't actually, James. I'm a bit blood phobic. If I see any blood, I faint. When I had my finger broken, they had to remove my nail. I couldn't even change my own bandage. I had to go back to hospital for them to do it for me because I'll faint. So I don't mind talking about blood, but I cannot see it. Anyway, so Hobart was very quickly a very strong suspect. And a lot of people tried to frame him. Very quickly in the inquest, there were a lot of very unreliable witnesses, really. Let me show you this lovely little street. Some of you might have been with me when we talked about Polly Nichols. This is Rupert Street. So it's a time capsule. It all dates back to 1824. So Eliza would have seen those very streets looking exactly the same as they are today. Your favorite street in London? Yeah. They've used it to film James Bond, EastEnders, Call the Midwife, and many documentaries, actually. Anyway, back to Eliza. So there were many witnesses that were not really trustable. One of them was actually Eliza's niece. Her name was Harriet Chapman. She was also in the sex trade, and she She claimed that Eliza had an argument with Hobart about a customer. She had a very wealthy customer from Birmingham that was a sword maker, and Hobart was really jealous. And there were another one. She claimed to be 19 years old. And she just made up full-length stories. She said that she had met the foreigner. She had been shopping with him. He was Italian, and he was very much in love with Eliza, and. He had asked her to marry her a couple of times, and he dropped a big knife. And it turned up that this was all rubbish. Her name was Catherine Edwin, and she was not even 19, she was 16. And when they realized that she was lying, apparently she gave I don't know if it's the one finger or the two fingers to the judge, but she made a hand gesture to the judge, and she pulled a face to the police officer at the inquest at the York Hotel. So she was obviously unreliable. There was another guy, he lived around here actually, a Welshman, that claimed, he came to the inquest and he claimed that he had seen Hobart coming out full of blood the morning of the murder. And that guy turned up to be completely unreliable as well. He lived around here in an accommodation with a lot of kids. He claimed they were his starving kids. And then they realized they were actually all young prostitutes that he took a commission on, a bit like a Welsh Fagin, really, if you've read your Oliver Twist. So he was unreliable as well, big liar. Then there was the Cavendish letter. So basically, there was a letter that was sent to the shop next to Wellington Terrace, and they claim to be from the customer, from the wealthy client that night, and they claim that they had left the site. They did not even do their deeds with Eliza, because Eliza they had an argument between Eliza and Hobart, and that turned up to be a hoax. But when they got that letter, they believed they had enough to arrest William Hobart. The public opinion was very much against him anyway, because he was making money out of Eliza's selling her body. And he got taken to prison. As he was in prison, the two brothers, Eliza's brothers, they came and they sold everything that was in that property. They put everything at auction. And because the murder was all over the press, before the Jack the Ripper story, really, that murder was probably the most famous murder in London, really. Eliza Grimwood became a byword for unsolved mystery, And so the brothers put everything on auction. They sold the bed a crazy premium price because there were some blood stains on the bed. The carpet, one gentleman bought the full carpet and he cut it into little pieces to sell it on the street. People wanted a piece of the stained blood carpet. So he made... the brothers were probably quite jealous that they didn't think of that themselves. So yeah, crazy. And the dog, remember the little dog that did not bark? Well, it was sold to a pub, The Gun in Spitalfield. You might have seen that pub through my Jack the Ripper tour. The owner of the pub thought, oh, okay, that'll make some money. People would come to the pub to see the dog that did not bark through the gruesome murder of Eliza Grimwood. And when Hobart came out of prison, actually, he was struggling to try to get his dog back. So crazy, people had already this macabre fascination into the story. They never found the killer, really. Obviously, William Hobart was a very strong suspect, but they didn't find anything against him. They looked at all his shirts. He had 7. They knew he had only 7 shirts. None of them was blood-stained. There was nothing against him. And the blood on his feet was actually matching with finding the body. So he had to be released, and then his life was pretty much over. He went back to his mum. He couldn't really go out because everyone on the street would judge him as guilty, and he actually died 4 years later. And apparently, when he passed away, he saw Eliza, and he was like, "Oh, Eliza, come and get me, release me," and he was still claiming his innocence. The murderer was never found. But at the time, we did not really, there was no such thing as a serial killer. People at the time believed that killers, they had a motive. They almost didn't really think that people could do that for pleasure. Now, with the retrospective, they have, of course, analyzed all the murders that were at the time. They already did that at the time, but there were just not that many examples of serial killers at the time. There were a few murders that could possibly would have been done by the same killer. I'll tell you about them in a minute, but let's take a look at the prices because we have an estate agent here. So this is by Rupert Street. This is part of the time capsule that I mentioned. 2,300,000. How many bedrooms? Double fronted house. Oh, double front. Oh, that's nice. But how many bedrooms? 3 receptions. Oh, how many bedrooms? Oh, 3 bedrooms. Okay. So yeah, 2 million for 3 bedrooms, but you've got a double. How did they call it? A double front. Not bad. Not bad. So this is also part of the time capsule area. Georgian, yes, it's 1824, I believe, all of it. How much? Oh, same price, 2,300,000. So again, it's a bit like Knightsbridge the other day. If you want me to have a house here, you might want to consider quadrupling your tips. Anyway, let's cross over. We are now on Stamford Street. We've been here, remember when we did the tour about Polly Nichols. Polly Nichols, she lived in a Peabody building here on Stamford Street. And just a couple of hours ago, when we talked about the double murder of Alice Smash and Emma Shrivel, it was here as well, number 118. Right, let me cross over. So yeah, they were. Of course, they never found the killer for Eliza Greenwood, but there is a decent suspect. In 1837, so 1 year before Eliza's murder, there was a lady on Frederick Street. So that's next to King's Cross. She was also murdered at night with no noise. I'm tempted to cross anyway. No, let's be a good girl. She was also murdered by. She had a French boyfriend, or at least people described him as French, and the murder was never. They never found the murderer. It stayed a mystery as well. The MO was very similar. She had a throat cut, very deep, almost to the vertebra, and so it could have potentially be the same man, especially the description of the boyfriend that was French. It is possible. There's no. Oh, and her name was also Eliza. Her name was Eliza Davis. And then a couple of years after Eliza Greenwood's murder, there were a clockmaker that was fairly rich. He had dismissed one of his staff that was a clockmaker from Switzerland. And that murder was thieves. They wanted to steal some of the watches. 2 men had been seen fleeing from the scene. One of them, the main suspect, was from Switzerland. It was the guy that had been fired. They tried to, actually the police hired a former police officer to send him to America because they believed the guy had escaped to America. And The police officer never came back. They think he might have actually found the Swiss guy in America, and they probably shared the money, and he never came back. However, two men had been seen running away from the scene. So the second one could also have been Eliza's murderer. Why not? And another year later, there was a case in Park Lane. A very wealthy gentleman, Lord William Russell, he had a valet that was also from Switzerland. His name was Francois Benjamin Courvoisier. And Courvoisier was a young man that was known to live a bit above his station. He used to spend a lot of money, see a lot of prostitutes, and he was Swiss, so he would be a French native, and you couldn't pronounce it. Well, Courvoisier, it's an alcohol that we put on the Christmas cake in France. We used to, we put it on the cake and then we flambe it. So it's very easy for me to say because it's actually a nice alcohol. And he was Swiss, but he was a native French, and he would have spoken Italian as well, because in Switzerland there's like 3 different languages. And so basically, the valet murdered the Lord. On that occasion, he was actually proven guilty. The Lord was also murdered in his bed. His throat was slashed, very, very deep as well. They found no blood on Courvoisier. So whatever technique he used to avoid being full of blood, he may have used the same technique for Eliza. Both Elizas actually, and he owned a Macintosh, some of those waterproof thingy. So he could have been using his Macintosh. Who knows? It's just a suspect. They have nothing strong against him, but he would definitely be matching the physical descriptions of the foreigner, and he was taken to Newgate prison, where he was hanged. And there's a lot of gossips that before to be hanged, he actually wanted to confess of 2 more murders. And actually the Times newspaper had published that he had confessed of Eliza Grimwood's murder. But then the Times newspaper had to retract themselves. Apparently that was not true. He never confessed. Who knows? He could have been. Some said that his uncle kind of stopped him from confessing, because he was gonna be hanged anyway. At the time, 1 murder was enough to be hanged, so he could have confessed the 2 more. Who knows? He could have been the man. Who knows? Anyway, this is the site, by the way. So at the time, it was called 12 Wellington Terrace on Waterloo Road. In Victorian times, often a batch of terrace houses would often have their own number. So it would be 12 Wellington Terrace, Waterloo Road, but it's on Waterloo Road, if you know what I mean. When they destroyed the terrace, that's what they built. So the Wellington Terrace would have covered those 2 buildings. Is that hospital still running? Anne is asking. Well, I'm getting there. The poor student, no, it's not running. The poor student that live here today, it's a student accommodation for King's College. They don't know that first, they live on a famous Victorian murder site. And on top of that, the Royal Hospital for Children and Women was very controversial. It closed down in, I think it was 1978. Because of a doctor that was, let's say a little bit too much in favor of, how do you call them? Narcoleptic, is that a word? When you put people to sleep. So yeah, he used to put, there were a lot of ladies suffering from anorexia or depression, and he was in favor of putting them to sleep. His name was William Walter Sargent. Oh no, not euthanasia, not putting, no. Putting them to sleep for, not killing them. yeah, putting them to sleep for a couple of weeks. Somewhere they had a room called the narcosis room, where some of those girls were put to sleep for 2 weeks. How do you call it? Yeah, it's anesthesian, but there's another word for them. Anyway, drugs that would make you sleep, and yes, exactly. So the Mike, the Notre Dame Uni is the red one, and the white one it's King's College. So both of them are student accommodations today, and oh yes, we could call it hibernation. Well, today the technique is actually still kind of used, or at least could be used by the secret services. Today we would call it brainwashing. It's literally putting people to sleep for a couple of weeks, hoping that when they wake up, all their problems would be gone. And he used to do however you call it, those electrodes in the brain, are very, very controversial stuff. And some poor girls were put to sleep for 2 weeks in the narcoleptic room. So yeah, a very sad place, and that contributed to the closure in 1978. So the poor students that live inside, they probably have no idea of all the dark stuff that have happened on the site. So oh, it shouldn't be fuzzy. It's not fuzzy for me, Mandy. So let me turn around so you can get another view. So that would be exactly the site of Wellington Terrace, so where Eliza was found. And I've got a photo here of what it would have looked like. So, well, an illustration of what it would have looked like at the time. So that would have been with the old Waterloo Bridge on the right. The old Waterloo Bridge, I think it's 1817, so it would have been newly completed at the time. They wanted to call it originally the Strand Bridge, but then it was called the Waterloo Bridge. Now, Eliza Greenwood's murder was, as I mentioned, all over the press. And it was, they wrote a couple of Penny Dreadful about the story. Everyone knew about that case. Actually, they struggled to find a tenant for the house. Eventually, about 4 years later, it was finally rented by a German guy that probably was out of the country at the time. So he probably didn't know all the gruesome details of the murder. The police officer in charge of the case, he was, his name is Charles Frederick Field. He was actually a friend of Charles Dickens. And when Dickens wrote Oliver Twist, he was actually criticized by the very graphic way in which he killed Nancy. We think actually Dickens might have been shocked by this murder himself, because there's a few similarities between the Eliza Greenwood murder and the case of Nancy. Eliza was killed here by the Waterloo Bridge. Nancy was by the London Bridge. Bill Stride could be assimilated to Hubbard. William Hubbard was not a pimp, but he was taking money out of his lover Eliza's sex trade, and well, it was the same with Bill. Really, he was abusing of Nancy. Bill was very careful not to have any blood on himself, but there were some blood on the paws of the dog. Not the same, but with Eliza, there was also a dog involved, and there were also no blood on Hubbard. And so yeah, there's a few similarities, so it could have inspired Dickens. And there was also a Welsh wagon in the story, so, maybe. Anyway, time for... yeah, you agree, Adam? Cool. So the time for a last murder mystery. Well, it's not so much of a mystery anymore. On the bridge, so that's Waterloo Bridge, by the way. So that's the new bridge. This bridge was built in 1939. We also call it the Ladies' Bridge, because in 1939, of course, that's when the World War II broke out, and a lot of the men they had to go fighting, and the ladies that were left in London they finished the construction of the Waterloo Bridge. So that's why it's called the Waterloo Bridge. And in '78, I think it was, there was a young man, well, young in his 40s. Called Gorgi Markov. He was from Bulgaria. He was waiting at the bus stop. He was working for the BBC. He was a journalist. He had actually left Bulgaria. He was a very famous writer there. But Bulgaria, through the Cold War, was, well, possibly the closest friend of the Soviet Union. Well, their ruler, I'm tempted to say their dictator, because that's exactly what he was. The president at the time, his name was Tudor Zhukov. Yeah, Tudor Zhukov. He was he was a dictator basically, and Markov had actually kind of criticized him in his writing. That's one of the reasons why he moved to London, because he knew that the regime was going to try to have a go at him. And he left his car here in Lambeth, and he was going to go to the BBC on a bus. He was waiting up there on the Waterloo Bridge at the bus stop when he got hit in the back of the leg by an umbrella. Like it happens every day on a rainy day, you know, we get umbrellas hitting us all the time. And then he saw the man with picking up the umbrella and jumping in a cab, in a taxi. Then he felt really funny. He went to work, I think, for a few hours at the BBC, and he told them he believed he had been poisoned by the KGB. And at the BBC, he had the reputation of being often exaggerating a little bit. But he was feeling very unwell, so he went. He actually went and checked himself into St. George's Hospital in Tooting. And at hospital, so he went to emergency and he said to them, "I've been poisoned by the KGB." And the doctors, obviously, they had some doubt about his sanity. He did have some funny symptoms, looking a bit like a cold, a flu, but they were a bit suspicious of, you know, you've got a guy coming in claiming he's been poisoned by the Russian. And he was admitted into hospital. They took care of him. Eventually, they started to believe it might indeed be poisoning, and they thought maybe snake venom or anything, and he died. He died in hospital. And of course, when he passed away, they realized it might have been serious. Scotland Yard actually took it very seriously when they realized it was a dissenter. You know, he had left the country because he was criticizing the regime. And when they did the autopsy in his leg, they found a little pellet. Let me show you a photo. A tiny, tiny little metal thing with two little reservoirs. So those would have been for the poison. They would have been closed with some kind of glycerine or something that could close it. And yeah, it was too late. And there was another case about the same time in Paris, another Bulgarian that did not die, probably because he was wearing a very fluffy jumper. So the little pellet might have been damaged by the jumper. He was also very unwell, but did not pass away. And the murder here, by the way, the date it happened, it was the president or the dictator's birthday. So he probably gave himself a little birthday gift by killing his enemy. We think at the time Bulgaria may not have had the technology really to produce those umbrella guns. So they would have been produced by the KGB, yeah. What year? 1978, Sandy. And there is one of those umbrellas there's a museum in Florida, a spying museum, where they have an example of those umbrella guns. So it's literally a jab. It's like a syringe at the top. Yeah, not that long ago. So when you see James Bond and stuff, this stuff still happened. Let me show you a photo of Gorgi. Where is he? Gorgi, where are you? There he is. Yeah, he had married. He had married. An English wife, and recently, I'm stepping in a massive puddle again. Oh no! Recently, he had a monument. The president in Bulgaria in 2014. They did a monument for him in Sofia. Let me show you. So that's his new monument. Same age as Janie. Yeah, I think he was 43 when he passed. Right, that's gonna be the end of the tour. Let me know if you happen to have any questions for me. I sounded Scottish when I said Gorgi. Yes, I think I've been watching some documentaries with Bulgarians being interviewed, so I try to pronounce it right. I probably don't, but yeah. Right, let me show you my face again. What's Eliza's last name? Grimwood. Grimwood. Let me try to spell it. I cannot. I'm dyslexic, but Grimwood. Grimwood. Yeah. There is a book about the case that is quite good. It's called The Ripper of Waterloo Road by Jane. I don't remember his last name. He's a Swedish author. Cool. Thanks everyone for coming today. Let me know if you have any questions for me. Thank you, Lorraine. Thanks everyone for your tips. Again, it's